Even though, say, that diet might not be optimal for that person over the long term, it oftentimes fills holes that was in their previous diet. People mistake the change with the outcome. An enzyme is the difference between the living and the dead. The difference between stones, plants, and people are enzymes. Quantum tunneling. They'll show up at a piece in the body, create a reaction, disappear, and then show up in another place in the body. How are you constantly adjusting to life? Because life is dynamic.
Welcome to the Melanie Avalon Biohacking Podcast, where we meet the world's top experts to explore the secrets of health, mindset, longevity, and so much more. Are you ready to take charge of your existence and biohack your life? This show is for you. Please keep in mind, we're not dispensing medical advice and are not responsible for any outcomes you may experience from implementing the tactics lying herein. Are you ready? Let's do this. Welcome back to the Melanie Avalon Biohacking Podcast. Today's episode is all things biohacking and enzymes, two of my favorite topics. It's with two awesome guys from the company BiOptimizers, who I've been working with for quite a while and I am a huge fan of. Something I realized we didn't address because I've talked with them so much on other episodes for the Intermittent Fasting podcast. But one of the cool things about Matt Gallant and Lightheart is that they have completely different dietary approaches, at least right now. Matt has been keto for quite a while, and Wade is plant-based. But what's awesome is they truly understand that there's not one diet for everyone, and not even at one time for everyone. And I think that is so important. And by coming together, they've created an amazing company with wonderful supplements to support your GI health and also just biohack your health in general. If after listening to this episode, you would like to purchase any of those products, make sure to use the link masszymes.com/MelanieAvalon, and you will automatically get 10% off your order. So that's awesome. The show notes for today's episode will be at melanieavalon.com/BiOptimizers. If you do struggle with digestive issues or feel like you react to certain foods, you can likely highly benefit from my app Food Sense Guide. It's a comprehensive guide to over 300 foods, showing their general levels of problematic plant compounds naturally found in plants. This is things like histamines, glutamates, oxalates, whether or not something is a nightshade. And I actually just updated that app. This is so exciting. It now contains gluten, lectins, and FODMAPs. Yes, all of those. I was getting so many requests for those compounds that I had to just buckle down and do it. So definitely get it. It's on the App Store now. I am a Himalaya partnered show, and if you follow the Melanie Avalon Biohacking Podcast in the Himalaya app, you will get early access to my podcast 24 hours in advance, so definitely check that out. Also, if you'd like to discuss all the biohacking things, the enzymes, digestion, wine, fasting, really anything, join me in my Facebook group that is Paleo OMAD Biohackers, Intermittent Fasting plus Real Foods plus Life. I would love to see you there. One more last biohacking thing. One of the things we contemplate and discuss in this episode is the concept of biohacking and how natural or intuitive should we be versus doing things which are, quote, less natural, like with supplements, genetic testing, other things like that. It's really a fascinating concept. And I was thinking that the equivalent on the skincare side of things is sort of like Beautycounter, which I am obsessed with. Beautycounter really is like the biohacking of the skincare world because they make skincare and makeup products which aren't necessarily completely natural, because natural actually isn't always best, but rather they use ingredients that are non-toxic, that are healthy for your skin, that support your skin health, and that work. So yep, the ultimate biohacking of skincare. I love them. One thing that's super important to me is they're actually tested to be free of heavy metals. That is actually a common problem in many, quote, natural skincare lines, which can be rampant in things like lead, for example, especially with mineral-based products. So I wholeheartedly adore Beautycounter. It finally made it possible for me to clean up my skincare routine and feel very happy about it. And I do have a special offer for listeners. If you go to beautycounter.com/MelanieAvalon, using that link will make something very special happen. If you want to know exactly what's going to happen, because I can't actually talk about it on the podcast, just get on my Beautycounter email list. That's at melanieavalon.com/cleanbeauty. Also on that list, you'll get all the latest news on the discounts, new products, the science of skincare, and so much more. I also highly recommend, if you do want to commit to non-toxic beauty, becoming a Band of Beauty member. It's sort of like the Amazon Prime for Beauty Counter. You get 10% credit back on all your purchases, which is awesome, as well as free shipping on minimum purchase orders. And you get an enrollment gift, which is amazing and way pays for that membership. And I'll put links to all of this in the show notes. All right, now enjoy the show. Hi, friends. Welcome back to the show. So I'm super excited to be joined here today with some awesome friends of mine that I feel like I'm starting to get to know very, very well. And that is Matt Gallant and Wade Lightheart. They are two of the geniuses behind the awesome company BiOptimizers. I've had 3 podcast interviews with them on my other podcast, the Intermittent Fasting Podcast. But this is the first time bringing you guys to the Melanie Avalon Biohacking Podcast. Super excited to have you guys here. How are you guys doing today?
Super excited to talk biohacking. Definitely one of my favorite topics to talk about.
Yeah, pumped to be here.
Yeah, we were just talking before the call. There's so many topics and tangents and rabbit holes that we could go on that we're just going to see where things go. So, pretty excited.
Maybe I'll jump in and talk about kind of a couple of frameworks that we embrace at BiOptimizers, and one of them is we call it the Biooptimization triangle, which one side is the aesthetics, how you look, which really comes down to just body fat and muscle gain. The other side is performance, which you could break down to physical performance and mental performance. And as entrepreneurs, and that's why so many of the people in the biohacking movement are entrepreneurs, it's because they need it. We're mental athletes pushing our brains to levels of energy and exertion that the average human being doing a manual job, it would certainly take them a long time to get up to. Like, even if they wanted to, just the output people would just fry. And of course, we build that over time, but our needs for peak mental performance is critical. And then the third side is the insides, how all your biomarkers, are they balanced, are they optimized, et cetera, et cetera. So, and that's really where a lot of the how you feel comes from, whether it's the serotonin, the mitochondria, all of these elements come down to how optimized the mitochondria, your digestion, which in our opinion is the foundational piece of health and nutrition. And we can talk more about that. But that's one of our main frameworks. So as biohackers, we're kind of always asking ourselves, how can we increase the size of all 3 components of this triangle? Because to give you an example, I mean, if your goal is aesthetics, you can do a ton of steroids and growth hormone and all these things and achieve an incredible aesthetic look, which Wade can comment on. But your insides are going to get, they're going to pay a significant price. So, all the things that we're into kind of, and of course the dosage matters. Certain things at low dosages are optimal, at medium to high dosages are very destructive. But that's where our whole idea of BiOptimizers, which stands for biological optimization, is about mastering the dance and tweaking all the things that ideally move all 3 sides, which obviously the nutritional components are part of it.
Yeah, that actually made me think of something. So, because with the biohacking world, I think a lot of people often come to it from, at least in the beginning, with the dietary aspect, because I think people oftentimes will change their diet and then they experience such radical changes that they didn't anticipate. Like, because people often will change their diet for like digestive issues or to lose weight, but then all these other things, if they find the diet that works for them, they experience all these other things like cognitive benefits, and then it just becomes this train where you just want to, I mean, that's what happened for me. You just want to like really optimize everything.
Well, I think there's a caveat. There's a caveat there, if I can interject briefly.
Oh, please
And I
do.
think this is maybe the biggest mistake that people make when they switch over to another diet. So every diet philosophy has strengths and weaknesses, and I think that's something that is a hard point for people to acknowledge. So there's advantages, say, to the ketogenic diet, advantages to a vegetarian diet, advantages to a paleo diet, and there's liabilities in each one of those. And then you got to put over the framework of a person's individual genetics and epigenetics. And oftentimes when a person switches, even though, say, that diet might not be optimal for that person over the long term, it oftentimes fills holes that was in their previous diet. So there's what I would call kind of like it's kind of like getting into a relationship, and there's kind of the romance period where you're just, it's just nothing but great because you're kind of running on this kind of biochemical, ride. And, then at maybe 6 months or a year down the road, or 2 years, maybe even 2 years, depending on how big those changes are, or how big the holes you're filling with the new diet, now you're going to suffer from maybe some things that you didn't anticipate, which your old diet actually covered. And so people mistake the change with the outcome, and without, real getting into the weeds, without understanding and getting the right experts and looking at genetics and epigenetics and, the various biomarkers, whether that's your insulin response or your hormone cascade or all these different things that you can look at. Well, those things are going to determine the ultimate outcome. And the bottom line, I think, if you're a biohacker, or like we say, one of the things that we call biological optimization, which Matt cleared is how are you constantly adjusting to life? Because life is dynamic. You could be on a diet, and I've experienced this. You can be on a diet or a system or a process that's working really well. Then you go through a major stress piece. You work too much. Maybe you go through a relationship trouble. There could be financial stress. There could be some other, maybe it's a sickness in the family or divorce or things like that put kind of external stressors that can put a person into the toilet, even if they're in the optimal diet for them. And the question is, well, how do you build yourself back without throwing the baby out with the bathwater?
There's one more thing too I want to add to what Wade said, that in terms of explaining kind of the increased benefits of switching, which is to remove toxins. And, I'm not talking about, the obvious toxins and the blue dyes and all the chemicals. I'm talking about our nutrigenomics and our gut biome will either happily be able to digest certain foods. And there's a lot of foods that are just not optimal for our biology. And this is where, again, this biological optimization. The great thing is we can do some tests like Viome, which what was really valuable about Viome, it validated a lot of intuitive things. And it also revealed some superfoods that I kind of always liked. For example, arugula, watercress. I don't like normal lettuces, and those came up as superfoods for me because they're feeding certain strains that are loving that. So that's an example. And of course, a food sensitivity test like Cyrex is very valuable because, of course, we could watch our heart rate variability and see the stress response from different foods, which is one way. But I think just getting a food sensitivity test is a great tool. So just to recap, what Wei was saying is you're filling in nutritional deficiencies, and then you're removing, maybe certain toxins. Which, for an example, if you're switching from meat to vegetarianism, maybe your uric acid was too high. Maybe, again, you don't digest red meat that well, or chicken that well, and those were stressors. And then you switch and you're getting that benefit. Same thing happens with carnivore. There's a lot of plants. So plants are a stressor to the body. Now, what a lot of people are failing to understand is that there's a hormetic response, which is improving the health of the body. So yeah, these plants have all these defense mechanisms designed to keep them alive. But at the same time, just like weightlifting and other, cryo and all these things that we stress ourselves with as biohackers, the side of food also falls in that category. And again, some foods are just too much, and the positive hormesis, the adaptation is not, it's low compared to the problems that are coming up. So it's really those two things that happen when people shift.
Yeah, I couldn't be in any more agreement. I'm so glad you brought that up because I mean, if I know one thing about diet, it's that I don't think there's one right diet for everybody, and there's not one right diet probably at any one time for everybody. And it drives me a little bit insane how people they'll start new they'll try a new dietary approach. You mentioned things like carnivore or vegetarianism or things like that, and because of such a drastic change, maybe they are adding in addressing deficiencies they had or getting rid of toxins that they didn't realize they were reacting to, and they do experience benefits. But then we get these camps where it becomes religious in a way, and everybody needs to follow that diet, and it just drives me up the wall. It did make me think a little bit more. So how intuitive do you guys think diet should be? Because perhaps that's one of the potential downfalls or intricacies or complications of biohacking. Because to what extent should our bodies innately just know what they need and we could just listen to our body's cues versus us need to intervene, be it with digestive support or genetic testing or eating certain compounds or refined in like or extracted supplements that may benefit us. What do you guys think is a healthy approach to biohacking?
First of all, I just love that question because and Wade and I are both huge on this, which is to do both. And if you're in a relatively healthy state, and I think the healthier you get, the more sensitive or body aware you become. You can and I won't wait to talk about his experience when he was dieting down in bodybuilding competitions because it's a great example of that. But the point is that you start noticing these things. Now, in terms of digestion, there's some very clear, let's call them warning signals that most people consider normal. And in our opinion, again, it's not normal. Just like brain fog shouldn't be normal. Just like a lot of different, things that people are just used to living in. And where we're from, both Wade and I were Eastern Canada, and the mentality there is like, I'm so full, I couldn't finish my plate. That was a great meal in a restaurant. So people are really used to kind of having a heavy stomach. And a heavy stomach, even though it kind of tells your brain that you're full, is obviously not a good biofeedback signal. Again, you should never really feel heavy in the stomach. Same thing with gas, bloating. I know a lot of course, women struggle with that, but most of that is food generated, which I'll get Wade to talk about the 5 stages of digestion because if you understand that, then all these problems you can troubleshoot them. And then obviously constipation, diarrhea, again, not normal things. So that's examples of very clear cues that obviously you don't need a blood test for to kind of gauge your digestion. And in terms of, there's a lot of things happening. I was just in Bosnia last week in Sarajevo, and I saw one of the most mind-blowing posters I've ever seen in my life. And it was massive. It was probably, I don't know, 4 feet by 4 feet. And it was called Everything That Happens Inside of a Cell. And I just looked at that for like 10 minutes and it just blew my mind. I'm like, yeah, this is how much is going on. And I think that's where blood tests and other, trace mineral tests, all these things will reveal things that we're maybe a few decades away from feeling the consequences of. So I think where a lot of the technology comes in is being able to detect these things far quicker and far earlier than, why wait till your cells are falling apart because you were lacking a trace mineral or, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think you got to use both. But, Wade, maybe talk about your experience. I know you were a big user of biofeedback and when you were competing with Scott Abel, and talk about all the cues you were using, because I know you've been a user of biofeedback for a long time.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I think you have to understand your own personality type. So some people are just naturally more intuitive and some people are, I would say, naturally more logical. And I think the more logical you are, the more you're probably going to skew towards data external systems. And I think the more intuitive you are, the more you're going to go to, kind of more intuitive biofeedback kind of things. And everybody's some mix of that. And so what I use it, so I was tracking biofeedback literally from my teenage years, because that's what Arnold Schwarzenegger said to do. And then that's was also echoed by Scott Abel later on. That what I would say is, once I got a professional coaching in my life, um, what they were able to turn to say physical cues. And keep in mind, this was for bodybuilding, so it was a very competitive sport that had specific training regimens and specific cues that you could know. And I was able to leverage the expertise of a world class trainer to help me interpret what it was when I woke up tired every day, or my appetite was up, or if I felt strong in the gym, or if I felt weak in the gym, or how sore I was. These were very crude formats relative to the sport I'm dealing with. And in that case, that's a high performance situation that a lot of people probably aren't going to experience. And same thing when you get into single digit body fat levels for competitions. The sensitivity level that you're at is, I would suspect it's probably 10x of the average person walking around in North America today. Like, you just get really, really sensitive as you get down to single body fat levels, and you also get a visual representation. Now, at my evolution, what I began to get into, as my competitive career ended, and I would say we were kind of biohackers before it was called that. We were talking about a lot of things they were today 15 years ago and testing it with our clients all around the world. And we got a lot of data from that. And what I found is, as the testing has improved, you can get specific tests. And if you're already tracking biofeedback, and the simple way to do that is just get a notebook, write down how you feel on a day-to-day basis, write down how you diet on it, or how you're feeling relative to your diet on a daily basis, and you'll actually see your own patterns. And if you're doing testing, correlate it with that. Over time, you're going to build an associative connection with the data. And that is when your intuitive capabilities, even if you're a more logical person, is, kind of going to go to what I say, the optimal sphere. I think a lot of people really underestimate their own internal capacity to figure themselves out. But I think for most people, we're so far gone as far as being in tune with our physiology, that the average person is going to be much better off getting some testing under the guidance of an expert, so that they can get that data points and start making proper correlations between that feedback as they develop their ability to be more intuitive and interpret their biofeedback correctly.
Yeah, it's such a complicated dance to follow, because I feel like for me personally, I've oscillated between times where I want to do all the testing, I want to see where all the markers are, and I want to address everything specifically. And then I kind of hit like supplement biohacking burnout, where I'm like, I'm over it. I'm like, let me just try to reach an intuitive state. And so it's like, how does one find this balance where they are, being intuitive and following a dietary protocol and exercise lifestyle protocol that works for them, while still upgrading their performance with, whatever tools they have access to.
Yeah, I think you're talking about, Matt kind of talked about it in the triangle, is what's the primary focus, and in checking in on that. Is it aesthetics? Is it performance? Is it health? And everybody has a tolerance, or on each one of those things at any given time. And I think checking in on that on a regular basis, because you know what, I can think of my own self as, where I was an absolute, as fanatical as you can get on diet. To have success on a national and international level in bodybuilding, you're a fanatic, okay? And there came to a point in my life where it's like,
Absolutely. You got to talk about the rice cakes, Wade. I just want to cue Wade up here because, I've never seen anything like it before or since. Wade and I were, struck up a friendship when he was competing, and I got to kind of witness that. So Wade, accurately describe what you ate for a long time.
Yeah, when I was competing, I think going for the Mr. Universe contest, My diet consisted of a very limited amount of things. I had 2 shredded wheat biscuits in the morning, and 50 grams of protein. My second meal was 25 mini rice cakes and 50 grams of protein. Uh, my third meal was 150 grams of potatoes and the protein. And then my fourth meal was the same as the earlier rice cake meal. And then the fifth meal was a salad and the protein. It was a small salad with no oil or dressing. Okay, so I was the absolute opposite thing. Now, did I get ripped and did I have single digit body fat level and was I competitive? Sure, it was a great performance diet as far as relative to that field, and it set me up for the biggest health crisis of my life. After the Mr.
Which
Universe contest.
let me jump in and describe that from kind of an outward perspective. So I saw Wade, and it was getting ripped, and it was kind of fun to see. I mean, Wade was getting kind of leaner every week, and you'd see the striations and stuff come in, but I was also seeing his brain decline. Okay, to the point where he would walk into World's Gym, and I would say, "Hey, Wade, how are you?" And a totally zombified look was continuing to walk. Say, "It's just another day in paradise, bro." And I saw that, like, it wasn't, it was kind of a gradual thing. And then Wade, maybe share what happened after that competition.
Yeah, after the Mr. Universe, I gained 42 pounds of fat and water in 11 weeks, turned from Mr. Universe to Mr. Marshmallow, which the good news was, number one, I could relate to my obese clients better. The feeling I had cosmetically, imagine going from your cosmetic to ideal to your cosmetic worst in 3 months. And then the secondary thing that also helped me understand the consequences of a performance only based diet, where that leads to. So if you're only pushing one end of that triangle, if you will, health, performance, that kind of thing, or aesthetics, you're going to run into trouble, or two corners, you can run into trouble. And then the third thing, I guess, would be that's where we started to dive into our dietary components and looking at digestion, looking at the role of the microbiome, the role of enzymes, all of these things that are really, really important. The importance of essential fatty acids and brain health and things like that. Being smart had nothing to do, or being mentally effective had nothing to do with how I looked on stage at the time, right? But it certainly made a difference in how I function in the rest of the world. And so it took us quite a while to correct that and to kind of, turn back the health back into a more healthy approach. And of course, Matt and I, who have what a lot of people say is polar opposite dietary practices, found the common ground in understanding the role of making sure whatever diet you're following is in alignment with your genetics, your epigenetics, your lifestyle, your microbiome, and your ability to absorb, utilize the food that you're eating.
Just want to go back to your question as well on a couple points. First of all, where we're at in terms of biohacking, or let's call it bio-tracking technology, in my opinion, is at 0.1% of where we're going to be in probably 10 years. And probably the biggest limitation in the tracking is that it's snapshot driven. If you take a glucose measurement, a prick versus a constant glucose monitor, they're incomparable in terms of the value of that data. Because now you can start seeing trends. You can start seeing how a meal affected you, and how it didn't affect you. And what's, as a quick little tangent, it's really interesting that they've taken foods. Just to recap, there's a glycemic index, which supposedly, if you eat X amount, your blood sugar rises by a certain number. But what they found in tests is that different people eating the same food had a very different glycemic response. Why? Because of your gut biome. Okay, so your gut biome.
Not to mention the same foods at different times of the day is going to change.
Even our genetics, there was a great eating cherry out of season study, and they found the down regulation of a couple of genes that actually made it harder to burn fat. So like, even our bodies are tuned in to, am I in a winter climate? Am I in a summer climate? But the point is that going back to the tech, I can't wait to just, have one device that's literally taking, frequent measurements, if not constant, of every biometric that we need, from hormones to glucose to, you name it, the more the better, but all working and kind of in the background where we don't need to be worrying about stuff. And it's feeding us suggestions based on what's happening in our bodies. Maybe, again, there's certain vitamins you need at that moment, there's certain supplements you need, certain foods you should eat, certain foods you should avoid. If we were able to just automate the whole thing, which is going to be done inevitably, I think in the next decade, that is really the golden age of biological optimization. Now, we're far away from that, and we have to use what we have, which is things like Oura rings and Whoops, and we do have a constant glucose monitor, and we can get blood tests, but blood tests is very expensive. I get a lot of blood tests, and it's not cheap, because I like seeing what's happening on a relatively frequent basis because I do experiments. But I can't wait for the day where I spend $200 and get 10,000 times more data that I'm getting now in a way that's easy to understand. But I think your intuition around taking time off is a smart thing, especially when it comes to supplements. Like, the only supplements, and I know this is going to sound self-serving, but the only ones that don't stop are the digestive ones. But a lot of the vitamins and immune system boosting herbs and growth hormone changing substances and things like that, I'm not going to just stay on them. I think, again, our bodies want to go through periods of growth and then periods of autophagy. And I think as biohackers, you want to cycle through systematically. And I think when you're taking time off, because toxicities can build even of vitamins and things like that. I was doing a lot of cheap vitamin B like 17 years ago, and I got a blood test, and I had toxic levels of vitamin B in my blood at that time. So that's a potential consequence of taking cheap supplements. And I think, again, you're going back to even the same concept as cycling from the nutrition, from whatever diet to carnivore, or whatever diet to vegetarianism. You're clearing up maybe some toxic overloads, or you're patching up deficiencies. But I think taking time off of biohacking and just kind of seeing where normal is, because I can biomodulate myself to pretty high levels in terms of performance and other things. Like, I'll just use yesterday as an example. So I just went on the craziest trip of my life. It was about 13 days, nonstop, 12, 14. I had a 17-hour day, and flew, to Europe, to Sarajevo, came back, did 3 red eyes, 4 time zones. So, got home Monday morning after a red eye. So I was hurting a little bit yesterday. I woke up and I'm like, okay, this is not my normal state. My physiology is hurting. I need to patch this up. So this is kind of how I think you want to approach, especially brain boosting things. You want to approach them kind of based on what you need at the time. So I took 5 Qualias caffeine free, 60 milligrams of my favorite CBD. I took 2 pills of Lavella, which is a calm aid. It's a lavender oil based product. It's awesome. Highly recommend that product. Not many people know about that. It raises alpha, and it's kind of like L-theanine. And then did 3 teacrines, and then just drank a bulletproof coffee. And that combination, I was on fire. I had to go till about 9:30 p.m. last night. But is that something I'm going to do every day? I mean, as fun as it was and as good as I felt, not really, So I think, again, this is where discernment and mindfulness and being present to what's going on, I think is critical for biohacking or biooptimization.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you brought that up. Perfect timing. Because actually, so in our last interview on the intermittent fasting podcast, we went on a whole tangent about the enzyme factor by
Hiromi Shinya.
by Hiromi Shinya. And I was actually, so Wade, because I was reading that when we were talking last time, and I was finishing it up last night. And one of the things he actually said which I don't think he has this. I was trying to find the study that he was referencing for it, but he was saying, I'm actually reading it right now, that like there was some research that indicates too many supplements can have a negative effect on our immune system, increase free radicals, prompt changes in the fat found in the liver, heart, and kidneys. And he's talking about supplements, like supplementing certain macronutrients and vitamins and things like that. So just to come back to your point about finding the balance and the tendency to potentially overdo things, it's crazy. I would love to hear a little bit more, especially Wade, hearing your story about your bodybuilding career and the implications of your dietary approach and what that did to your body. So coming out of that, because I think a lot of people do, maybe not to that extreme, because not everybody is a national bodybuilder, but people often do get into these dietary approaches that seemingly serve them or serve their goal for a certain amount of time, but might actually be perpetuating intense, hormonal, biological effects that are really, really hard to get out of. So some questions surrounding that. How did you come out of that? And when our bodies do experience such extreme dietary changes like that, do you think that our bodies can always, return to a state of wholeness and well-being, or can we potentially do just so much damage in restrictive dietary protocols that we'll never be able to be, quote, what we were before?
First and foremost, I'll answer the last part of the question first. The body's ability to reconstitute itself or rebuild itself, if given the proper technology under the right guidance, is pretty extraordinary. That being said, most people who get themselves into a compromised state do not have access, are unaware, or are unwilling to make the necessary adjustments, which are sometimes radical, both not just what they're doing dietary wise, but also what they're doing lifestyle wise. So for my, and I'll explain this relative to my own case, but I've seen literally hundreds and hundreds of people in that situation. Okay. And I think it gets stronger too, the more radical the technology you get. So for example, if you get into hormones and, once you go down that rabbit hole, pretty hard to come out of it once you take that step. So I always tell men who are looking to say use, testosterone replacement therapy, or younger men, which are oftentimes partial to using anabolic steroids to meet kind of the muscle and fitness cover look. I think many people really underestimate the consequences. And if you're going to go down that road, I think you really need to have expertise and guidance and someone who's well-versed in that. And those are not, easy to find, I would say, or to leverage, and they're certainly going to cost you stuff. The other thing is oftentimes we follow a performance, or we choose a dietary or exercise regimen or whatever it is based on what our lifestyle objectives. So I see this all the time with aging executives who have a standard of performance and capacity that they want in their 20s or 30s, and they're in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and they haven't fully accepted that the body is not as responsive as it was that, and they don't want to make the necessary changes in their lifestyle because they're demanding this. And so what happens, I often start what I call chasing the dragon and using more and more invasive technologies, which set them up for, health disasters, right? Or sometimes even personal disasters, right? So you have to take those into consequence. So once you enter into the realm of drugs, I do believe that there's far more implications than, say, if you're doing nutritional supplements. Now, in my own case, when I came out of that, I had the guidance of Dr. Michael O'Brien, who transformed both my life and Matt's life. And I'll tell you exactly what I did. I did 35 enzymes a day, 5 in 5 divided meals, because that's what I was used to at the time. I don't eat that many meals on a day now. And I took 5 enzymes before every meal. And I took 2 probiotics with every meal. And I took 10 probiotics in the morning, 10 probiotics in the evening. And that's what I did in order to reconstitute my microbiome, which I had totally destroyed with my 9 months or 10 months on the diet I told you about, the 5-thing diet. That's the 5 food diet that I did. I destroyed my microbiome. So bottom line, I did that. I went to a completely raw food diet because I was extremely acidic at the time. And it took me about 6 months. I also added in some vitamins and minerals, a lot of green foods stuff, some special amino acid combinations as well in conjunction with that. And that it took me 6 months to kind of rebuild my health and my physique. My physique, really was great in 6 months. And I had similar condition, not quite to contest condition because I wasn't pushing it that fast, but I got to really great conditioning, feeling great, which was a total difference from before. Now, keep in mind, at that time, I was, I was 31 years old at the time, 31, 32. So, my body's responsiveness was different. I wasn't on any anabolics of any type. So that was a factor that allowed me to, mine was mostly dietary and stress related from the training and the competition standpoint. And so, take my lifestyle 2 years after that, right? Well, 2 years after that, I found that there was holes in my raw food diet that had to be addressed, right? And I had to make another pivot again. And so these are the kind of things that as you move through the different stages of life, that you're going to have to be reflective of where you are, where you're at, and where you want to go. And then how much time, energy, and investment you're going to make on that, because there's always a trade-off. If Matt wanted to be his optimal healthy self, he'd probably have to dial back his business career somewhat. And if you want a better business career, there's a lot of people in the health industry, they're probably going to have to pay less attention to their health. And if you're dying of sickness whether it's self-induced or genetic or environmental related, you're probably going to have to dial back your business and your personal life in order to address that and come out of it. So these are always factors, and that's why sometimes when you do these podcasts, you do stuff, I think a lot of people, unfortunately, will we might be commenting on a specific person or a specific thing or answering a question, and they take that as the gospel or the truth, but it's relative to the person at the time and their goals and where they might be. And of course, that's where your, as I call it, the Jedi Council comes in. And that's your team of experts that helps guide you through that.
I love that. And I do wonder, so as far as the hormones go, would you also extend, you spoke about like testosterone with men. Would your thoughts surrounding hormones also apply to things like progesterone and hormonal?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll say one quick comment and I'll let Matt kind of go on it. Yeah. I can remember, I'll give you an example. I had a female client back when I was a personal trainer. She was an awesome lady. She was actually a billionaire, just a fantastic person and individual. And she was aging, and she wanted to get on a variety of different hormones from a doctor. And I remember looking at her panel, and I was like, I think you need to address a couple of these issues before you go down that road. I have some serious concerns. She didn't want to listen to me. I understand it. I was just the personal trainer at the time from her perspective. And, 5 years later, she was dead. For the very reasons that I suspect it was going to be a problem. But her commitment to performance and optimal or performance as concordant with her cosmetic ideas really jeopardized her perspective on health. And I'll let Matt jump in from here.
So I have been on testosterone for around 4 years. Now, prior to that, and how Wayne and I met, I only competed once in bodybuilding, and I was so against steroids at the time. I really wanted to see if I could do it naturally, which I've, over many years of insane hard work and not having the genetics, I realized I couldn't. So I gave up on that. But anyways, the time I competed, I saw Wade, and, I realized that, okay, testosterone, and I didn't want to do testosterone. I didn't want to do those things. I just stopped bodybuilding. But 4 years prior to starting testosterone, I tried, every supposed testosterone booster on the market. Nothing really moved the needle. There was a few things that moved estrogen a little bit, and there was stuff that moved luteinizing hormone, which is a good one, especially for sex drive. And then in terms of testosterone, nothing moved it, which, by the way, what matters more is free testosterone. And that's where certain nutrients like boron and zinc, if you're deficient in those, if you fill those gaps, you'll see a boost in that. But even that, my testosterone at the end was in the 200s. I think for a man to feel in his peak self, I would say it's around, 500 to 1,000 is around the range. These days I keep myself around 750, and I feel pretty good. Higher than that, to me, this is where, again, the difference between optimization versus maximization is one thing. Again, I'm not trying to get as big as I can. I'm not trying to lose as much body fat as I can. I'm mindful of all the data parameters, and I get frequent blood work and monitor all the things you need to be mindful of, which, again, you need to look at, your prostate, your liver enzymes and things like that. So knock on wood, I haven't had any issues, but I'm constantly monitoring to make sure that if there are, I'm catching them really early. But as Wade alluded to, you want to work with functional medicine doctors that are really on the bleeding edge. And the good news is there's more and more coming out there. I think it's a great trend in an emerging market segment that you're going to see a lot of doctors shift to that. But yeah, it's like Wade said, it's not a light decision. It's a permanent decision, more or less, unless we find a peptide or something that can activate that system. But in terms of testosterone dropping, again, we're all biologically wired to peak in our 20s and then wither away. That is the biological wiring that every single human has. So if we're not doing things to, again, slow that down, then we're going to age and we're going to have all the consequences, brain, body, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I think this is a good segment into another framework, which is kind of like the 3 levels of transhumanism. And as biohackers, I think we all fall into this category of transhumanists. And the first level is like biomodulation. It's tweaking things, it's hormesis, it's exercise, it's all the biohacking stuff. It's kind of like the process of hormesis. You're triggering responses. You're, lightly patching nutritional deficiencies using supplements. The second level, now we're into bioenhancement. That's a whole other level. That's where the hormones come in. Peptides, stem cells. We're radically enhancing or changing systems in the body. And again, you have to be mindful of all the relationship between all the systems and monitor that. That's where the tracking comes in. And the third frontier, which is really here now and it's about to explode, is biotransformation. And now we're talking gene splicing, we're talking cybernetics, we're talking brain to tech interfaces, such as Neuralink, which is here, and of course it's not mass market, and I won't be the first guy for either genetic engineering or Neuralink, but I might be in line for the third and fourth variation of those things. I think it's wise to do your research and make sure you understand what you're getting into.
It's an intense frontier that we're entering.
I would cite the book Homo. I call it Homo Deus. Some people call it Homo Deus, by Yuval Noah Harari, and he was also the writer of *Sapiens*, which was, where he outlines the 5 different types of species that were on the planet and emerged into Homo sapiens as we know it today. It's a pretty fascinating book. But the second book with this Homo Deus kind of book is where humans are right now, with the rise of infotech and biotech, are literally, we're going to enter into an era in the not too distant future. And this is part of the conversation, both on a political level and on a social level, is that there is going to be the emergence of a radically enhanced species on the planet. And it's happening now in the biohacking community, and biohackers are the early adopters of that evolutionary shift, that they are able to perform at levels previously not in the capacity. I'll give you a great example. Tom Brady and James Harrison, both are football players. James Harrison was the longest standing linebacker in the history of the NFL. Tom Brady is probably the highest performing quarterback at his point. And, they're spending, Tom's probably spending upwards close to $1 million a year. Harrison said that he was spending $370,000 a year to keep him on the field. And it made sense for guys like that, because they're making millions of dollars a year. And this is where athleticism is going, and this is where high performance executives are going. So in order to compete with the 30-year-old executive, if you're a 55-year-old guy, your options are pretty much limited. You pretty much have to become a biohacker. And it's the same thing also for females, I think, which is really important to understand, is that women today now have more choices than they had in generations past. They have choices largely in part because of, sanitary developments for women's periods and the advent of birth control. Those two elements allowed a woman to decide whether she wants to be, to bear a child or not. And a lot of women are choosing to bear children much later in life. Now, because they're doing that, because they want to experience these other aspects that weren't really available for women prior to. People can look about the social components of it, but there's just the biological factor of being a woman and bearing a child, of something a man can never possibly do. Or, of course, maybe they'll genetically alter us and maybe that'll happen. Who knows? But the bottom line is as women start to have children later and later in life, the consequences of that are significant. We're made to be having children when they're like teenagers and young adults primarily. And and of course, women died a lot from childbirth as well. And technology allowed more women to survive the childbirthing experience than they were before. So they're already biohacking. We just don't necessarily look at it that way because it's so commonplace. And I think as women get older and they start having children, the biochemical consequences of those choices are significant. And I think you're going to see an explosion of women biohackers as they come to terms with the reality of how do they stay in their optimal state as they age or choose to have children at a different age than they were previously condemned to, if you will, in the past.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. That's something I've been thinking a lot about, especially just as far as like the female body is concerned in this whole biohacking world and this stress world and everything, hormones, just because the female body does seem to have another aspect to it as far as how it reacts to stress and the implications of dietary changes. And then even things like you were talking about with extending the potential fertility window. The implications, I don't even know if we know where things will go in the future. Kind of like, I don't think we saw the implications of, not to say it'll be a bad thing necessarily that happens, but with things like GMOs or things that I think we didn't realize would have such far-ranging consequences by fiddling with the natural mechanism of things in our environment. I think it's really hard for us to get a grasp of the implications of that.
What there is a positive, which if you look at every technology, it goes through a few phases. One is, a lot of waste. If you look at the Industrial Revolution, take a look at cars. Obviously, there was a lot of pollution, which gotten better and better. And now we're basically in zero emission technology, thanks to guys like Elon Musk. So I think that a lot of technologies are going to go through that, including potentially even GMOs. Maybe we'll truly create superfoods. The issue with the intent of the GMO was to maximize yield, not maximize health. So if we get kind of a new generation of high calibrating, high consciousness scientists actually engineering food to be superfood, not, make the biggest tomatoes you can with zero nutrition. And it could survive whatever climates and blah, 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 which again, I'm not necessarily knocking, but it does seem to affect our gut biome according to a lot of issues. And Wade and I have way bigger issues with the pesticides.
That's actually, yeah. I realized I was saying GMOs, but I meant to mention pesticides as well, with the implications of like the water soluble toxins and the effect on the gut microbiome and the genetic effects of it, I think are just overwhelming.
Well, if you look at herbicides, pesticides, and insecticides, they all have the same ending as homicide and suicide. And how they work, and just so people understand the implications of it, what those chemicals actually do, how they kill the pests or those agents that are, disrupting the yield of that crop, is they interrupt the enzymatic process of those animals and render it so dysfunctional that they die. So think about that. Well, if I'm going to kill a bug and I need, X amount of dose of, I'm just going to go say it, whatever chemical Monsanto has thrown on my crop. And, you know, how much of that do I need to ingest before it damages me? How much do I need to ingest? And what's interesting, I can't tell you how many people have told me they can't eat something like, pasta, which would be a wheat-based or whatever here in North America. They go to Europe, they have bread or pasta, and they hang out in Italy for 2 months. They never have a digestive issue with that food. And they come back here and the first bowl of pasta they have or loaf of bread, they're in pain or they're bloated or dysfunctional. And I relate that directly to the enzymatic interruption that's happening. And then there's a cumulative effect. We know there's a cumulative effect because if you take tests of adipose tissues, I had a Harvard surgeon who put the first stent in the body. He's a friend of mine. He said to me, when we extract the fat tissues, here's what we found. We find herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, dyes, and preservatives. All of those agents, which are agents of what I would say the modern food production and food distribution industry, which solved the calorie issue or solved starvation issues, which plagued the planet forever. But it was a short-sighted look at what food is and what's required and what are the consequences of adding these agents in. And so as a society, I think we have to recognize we do need mass food production and mass food distribution. But our previous definition of food was limited and had some serious gaps in it. And we're having those consequences, as well as addressing the issue of chronic toxicity due to these agents that have helped us solve the calorie program, but have actually initiated, I would say, an advent of genetic diseases, toxic related agents or challenges that people are subject to today.
Hi, friends. I hope you're enjoying this episode with the team at BiOptimizers. One of my favorite biohacks on the planet is, hands down, red and near-infrared light therapy. Red and near-infrared light therapy can almost seem too good to be true because it can magically address so many things. But there's a scientific reason for that. That's because red and near-infrared light therapy actually works on the level of the cell to affect how cells generate energy. And when cells are properly generating energy, well, everything just sort of works better. That's why studies and real-life experience show that red and near-infrared light therapy can provide an array of benefits. We're talking things like smoother skin, enhanced collagen production, reduction of fine lines and wrinkles, reduced inflammation, speedier muscle recovery after workouts. There's been a ton of studies on that one. Even targeted fat burning. Yes, I said it. That's because this light therapy can actually break down fat cells, making them more porous, so their fatty acids leak into the bloodstream, which you can then burn off. And actually, red light is the natural light found in the rising and setting sun, and I personally adore turning on my Joovv device in the morning and evening. I find that it really helps regulate my circadian rhythm, and the effects on mood are insane. I almost don't feel complete until I've turned on my Joovv device in the morning and evening. Especially during the winter months when the sun might be a little bit lackluster, using red and near-infrared light therapy can actually significantly boost mood. One study even found that treatment with red and near-infrared light therapy led to reduced use of antidepressants. Yes, it had that much of an effect. Basically, the benefits go on, but the catch is, because there is always a catch, it's necessary to get the exact wavelengths to generate all of these benefits. That's why I wholeheartedly suggest you check out the Joovv devices. They're insanely high quality, and they're specifically formulated to produce the exact wavelengths you need to experience all of these incredible biohacking benefits. I love these devices. They come in all different sizes and are also modular, so basically you can build up to bigger units. And they also have a financing plan now, which can make it even more accessible. And I do have a special offer just for listeners. If you go to joovv.com/MelanieAvalon, you'll get two things. You'll get a free gift from Joovv, and then if you use that link and forward your proof of purchase to podcast@MelanieAvalon.com, I'll send you a signed copy of my book, What When Wine? Lose weight and feel great with paleo-style meals, intermittent fasting, and wine. If you are at all into biohacking and you haven't experienced the red light train yet, definitely jump on it. All right, now back to the show. So when it comes to enzymes, because you're speaking of disrupting, that's crazy about the mechanism of action behind the pesticides and herbicides. So when it comes to enzymes, can you Can you paint a picture in general of what enzymes are? Because I think we have this word enzymes. Um, so there are enzymes in the body, there's digestive enzymes. What are enzymes?
Great question. You know, it's interesting, and this is the part that why Matt and I are on this massive crusade for people to consume enzymes on a daily basis, and that is we both have a background in exercise physiology and nutrition kinesiology, and we've read literally hundreds of books. And every one of these books on nutrition will have maybe a page or a paragraph talking about the role of enzymes, and that's all you hear. You don't hear anything else about it, and so it's overlooked by medical fields, it's overlooked by nutritionists, it's overlooked by sports performance experts. And it frankly, it's probably the biggest mistake they can make. And finally, we're starting to get evidence to support that as far as recovery and longevity and health and things like that. And I'll refer to Dr. Howell's Enzyme Nutrition and Enzymes or Food Enzymes for Health and Longevity. So what an enzyme is, first off, an enzyme is the difference between the living and the dead. The difference between stones, plants, and people are enzymes. There is literally thousands and thousands, over 25,000 known chemical reactions that are formulated or accelerated through enzymes. Enzymes are essentially catalysts. Basically, what they do is they take something they take substance A and convert it into substance B in your body, and while retaining its own principles, and then they'll go off and do something else. And so every time that you damage your enzymatic potential, and your enzymatic potential is the total enzyme capacity of an organism. And basically, think of it this way. The only thing that does works is enzymes and probiotics are like specific targeted bags of enzymes that do, if you look at it. Those things, there's a finite capacity, which Dr. Howell called your enzyme potential. That is your ability to do metabolic work or biochemical work. And, as they study enzymes, they're very real. They have a quantum tunneling ability. It seems like they appear here and then they disappear and they show up here. They have all these radical properties.
Wait, can you expand on that?
Yeah, it's like they'll show up at a piece in the body, create a reaction, disappear, and then show up in another place of the body. The same enzyme. Yeah, they call it quantum tunneling. They call it quantum tunneling.
So can they trace enzymes through, like, how do they?
Well, there's a series of studies, and you're getting they don't really know the mechanism of why that is. They just can track the kind of the markers of enzymatic activity, and they'll show it disappear and then reappear, but they can't see the enzyme itself at that in the in-between stage. So there's a bunch of biochemical stuff. The Netherlands back in the day actually built a whole stomach to see how enzymes they wanted to prove that enzymes become reactivated in the intestinal tract if they're properly made. And they were able to demonstrate that, which previous to do that, everybody said that enzymes were destroyed in the high acid environment of the stomach. And yet they were able to prove that that's absolutely not the case if you have a properly formatted digestive enzyme. The other factor is if you look at the enzyme potential of the food that we are eating today, it's almost zero across the board. And you can a simple experiment is go eat a carrot out of a garden, an organic garden versus a carrot in the store. It's going to taste, it's going to feel, it's going to touch completely different. And it's going to have a whole bunch of different responses inside your body, and you can feel the difference. I can remember eating an heirloom seed from the people that don't have a Mennonite farm. So the people that don't use tires and engines and all that stuff. I had a tomato and a cucumber, and I was full on a tomato and a cucumber. It was so nutrient dense and had so many enzymes because it was a 300-year-old, heirloom seeds that they were using. And so what I was eating is nothing like a tomato we'd eat today. Plus we cook all our food, which destroys all the enzymes. So the average person, by the time they get 30, and this was back in the 40s, we're only getting 30% of the enzymes less. Today, I bet it's probably 10 or 15%. And that's why people suffer from low energy. That's why they have trouble with digesting their food. That's why they have brain fog in the morning, is largely in part because their body doesn't have enough enzymes present in order to break down the food that they have. And of course, it's a perpetual problem that has led to now we have 12% of the emergency hospital visits are gastrointestinal related issues. We have 25% of the population on prescription medication for some sort of digestive ailment, and we have a third of the population who are suffering some sort of digestive stress on any given day.
Okay, I have so many follow-up questions about enzymes. I'm so excited right now. It's like ridiculous. Okay, so what is the purpose of the enzymes in these natural plants? I mean, I wouldn't think it would be to digest itself. Like
Actually, it is.
oh,
Go ahead,
okay.
Matt. Go ahead, Matt.
Well, actually, well, one thing that people might have heard of, maybe they haven't, is soaking nuts. And these nuts have enzyme inhibitors. And when you soak them, then the plant knows it's a safe environment to come out and to drop these enzyme inhibitors, and that's when a plant comes to life. But then, if you take a banana, so I live in Panama, and if you take plantain, for an example, which is very commonly eaten here, you can kind of eat it either when it's really green, or if you let it sit, then the enzymes break the starches into glucose and it becomes really sweet. You prepare other dishes. Of course, we see that with bananas. They go from green to brown and rotting. And that's the enzymes breaking that down. And it's just part of the cycle of life. It does this thing, it comes out, and if nobody eats it, then it moves on to the next phase of life.
And I'll add to that. I'll add to that as well. So there's a lot of evidence that humans developed color vision, unlike, say, carnivore species, so that we could recognize the coloration of fruits, because humans have been traditionally frutivores, certainly on their early ancestors, probably predating humans. If you look at Homo erectus and these type of things. And so one of the reasons we developed that is just look at where is the enzymatic potential of that food. And so a couple of the interactions is temperature. So temperature and light and the biophotonic energy can also interact with the enzymatic capacity of the body. And I'll give you a real world example. I'm an extremely fair-haired person. I'm a blonde hair, northern hemisphere. I would burn very easily. But by taking massive dosage of enzymes over a period of time, I can get a deep dark tan, and I can go out into the sun for extended period of times where there was no possible way that I could do that in the past, because now I have enough enzymes to create the chemical reactions to improve the melanin of my skin. And that's directly correlated to something. And I've duplicated that with dozens of my friends who were fair-haired, and I told them this story. They didn't believe me, and I said, "Look, just go on a 25 enzymes a day for the next 6 months, and see what happens when you go in sun tanning." And they'd be like, "I can't believe this. This is unbelievable." So that was kind of an anecdotal research around that. So and to answer the question, for example, when a killer whale eats a seal, and all physical organisms have an enzyme called cathispin. And that enzyme becomes activated at the moment of death and literally starts to accelerate the decay and degeneration of the cellular matter. And the same thing is with plants. And that's why if you freeze something, it will suspend that the natural rotting of, say, if you put bananas in the fridge, if you put bananas on the counter, they're going to go bad in a week. If you put bananas in the freezer, well, they can stay there for years before they bring out, because you've actually stopped the enzymatic reaction. So temperature is a big factor. And of course, at 114 degrees, you destroy all the enzymatic capacity of anything. And that's part of where pasteurization and sterilization came in, to preserve food for food distribution, so we can get out of the grocery store shelf, which is nice and convenient. But again, we left out enzymes in the definition of food. And then what happens is our body has to manufacture enzymes to counteract the lack of enzymes present. And that has a metabolic cost, which accelerates aging, which increases the likelihood of degeneration and limits your capacity to kind of optimize your performance. And that's why, as a biohacker, I believe that the foundation of being able to interact and develop the kind of superpowers that you want to develop, or maintain capacity of an early person, is directly correlated to systematically using enzymes over the long term.
Let me jump in for a sec. And I think, everybody listening, all the biohackers out there, they're really wondering, well, what does this mean in the real world? What kind of improved performance? Maybe you don't have bloating and gas because you eat really clean. Well, what we found with enzymes, first of all, in terms of recovery from exercise or recovery from injuries, it can cut the time in half. And I know Wade, for some of his later competitions after his disaster, used massive amounts of enzymes while training, a couple times a day and stuff like that. So recovery is big. Neurotransmitters, which again, if you're talking about peak performance, if we're back to the mental performance component, a lot of it's driven by neurotransmitters. And if you're struggling to break proteins down into amino acids, your body is not going to have enough amino acids to assemble the neurotransmitters and the peptides like melanin that Wade just referred about. And that's an issue. So an example, my friend Frank, he's 78 now, might have just turned 79. At the time was 75. And he got on Masszymes, which is our best-selling product. And within, I think, 2 months, he stopped taking a bunch of antidepressant drugs they had been using for a decade plus. So again, and these enzymes are not obviously affecting the neurotransmitters directly, but they're producing far more amino acids, which is the key to just about everything in your body. The enzymes work with the amino acids and other nutrients to produce certain effects and results. Then from the anti-aging perspective, one of the interesting theories that is out as far as what's actually killing centenarians and super centenarians is protein accumulation in the cells. So, if you're eating food and you're not breaking the protein down, and that protein is, seeping through, first of all, it can kill you. And an allergic reaction is an undigested protein your body's seeing as a threat. But even again, the let's just call them normal proteins. If they accumulate in the cells stop functioning, and then they can't do their thing. They can't duplicate. You got senescent cells and all these issues. So we believe that one of the best things for the aesthetic side, especially longevity, is to do fasting. And of course, you're a huge fan of fasting with your other podcast. And take high dosages of proteolytic enzymes. And the proteolytic enzymes are the ones that break down the proteins into amino acids. And again, if you're not eating and you take proteolytic enzymes, well, first of all, they're going to break down undigested proteins in the intestinal tract. Second, they're going to go into your bloodstream and start cleaning house there. And the third thing, and Wade, I'd like to maybe share your sister's story, is cancer. So there are some doctors, Dr. Gonzalez, he's using fasting in conjunction with proteolytic enzymes at superhuman dosages. And the theory is that it can break down the wall of the cancer cell, and then the immune system can identify it and deal with it. But Wade, anything you wanted to add to that?
I think that was pretty succinct. I will say that with tumors, and we're not making any claims here, by the way. We're not advocating this as a treatment protocol or anything like that. Go see your doctor. Viruses and tumors share one common element, is that they create a protein coating that our immune system can't respond or react to and can't identify it. And so the theory goes from Gonzalez is that if you can break down that coating, then guess what? Your immune system can attack that. And I do believe that's correlated with enzymatic capacity. And I have a theory, and of course this is an unproven theory, but I have a theory. One of the reasons why people get sick more often as they age is that they don't have enough enzymes, or they don't have the right microbiome that can take out the viral component, the bacterial component, or maybe the formation of tumors inside the body, because they don't have enough enzymes in order to break those things down properly. And it's just, we just get used to the aging process as just a gradual degeneration. But I believe that a lot of that degeneration, particularly cognitively, is relative to enzymatic components. Now, diet is a big factor, and I don't want to discount diet. But again, your diet is only as good as well how well you digest, absorb, and utilize whatever the diet is you're having. And I don't think that there's anybody today in the modern world that has a completely optimized digestive tract.
Yeah, and I was speaking to you before we started about how I was interviewing David Sinclair this week about aging and longevity, and actually that was something that he had brought up as well, was because he's been with his work working towards an aging cure involving the epigenome and its relation to genes and the aging process. But one thing he did say was that the potential, like one of the things that might be harder to address with aging would be actually these protein buildups. He was using the example of like amyloid plaque and Alzheimer's and stuff. Um, but he was saying that by fixing and addressing the epigenome, it'd be possible that perhaps people could have these plaque buildups or protein buildups, but because of it in epigenetic changes, they wouldn't create the inflammatory perpetuating response. So it's fascinating. I think, yeah, the enzymes, the protein, everything is huge. I do have actually some more follow-up questions about the enzymes because like you said, Wade, people, I think it's so huge, but it's so like rarely discussed. So I'm really excited to be going deep in it because I know for me, and this is just a N of one, but I did go through a dietary phase where I was eating massive amounts of pineapple, actually, which obviously has the enzyme bromelain in it. And I mean, I actually want to bring it back into my life for the bromelain benefits. Right now, I'm kind of struggling with like blood sugar type issues, so it's been a fail every time I try. But what are your thoughts on enzymes from foods? Because you mentioned whether or not they are denatured in the stomach. When we take in enzymes naturally from foods, do you think they can still have a systemic effect, or do they just work locally in the digestive process? And then I have some follow-up questions about like masszymes and supplemental enzymes.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll answer that real quick. No. The enzymes present in a food are usually sufficient enough to break down and digest that food if you're eating in a raw and pristine case and it was grown under pristine conditions. Most of the food that we get isn't there. The other thing is if you get into more genetically altered things like pineapple and stuff, oftentimes people that it has a blood sugar issue and then there's a burning. I would get burning in my mouth when I eat a lot of pineapple. For example, it gets to a point after 3 or 4 days of massive pineapple use as I start getting sores in my
Yeah.
mouth from it, right?
But
And
it
so
felt
that's
so
that's
great
obviously the
besides that. So
yeah, it feels amazing, except my face is burning off, right?
yeah.
So just to qualify the different types of enzymes, because I think a lot of people don't understand that either. They say, well, I took a protease or I took bromelain or papain and didn't feel anything or got very limited results. There's food enzymes which are found in food, and then there are derivatives which are sometimes sold as supplements as the cheaper end of a supplement. Then there's animal-based enzymes, which are extracts from animals, and you'll see a lot of that.
Like pancreatin. How do you
Yeah,
say it?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Pancreatin. So which is relative to usually a very specific function or for pH levels inside the body. And then you get into what's systemic enzyme. And a systemic enzyme is an enzyme that is not used in the digestive role, but is used to break down tissue, something like serrapeptidase or serrapepsidase, depending if you're using the two different types, would break down adhesions in the body. And there's a variety of different enzymes in those fields. And then there is cultured enzymes. And a cultured enzyme is an enzyme that is grown under extremely rigid conditions using a variety of stuff. It's a highly secretive process that there's only a few places in the world that actually do this. And virtually other enzyme people extract the information from that. And a cultured enzyme, number one, will work in a range of pH that is, anywhere from 2 to 12. Which gives it much more robust things based on the person's diet. The other thing is it's going to be anywhere from 100 to 1,000 times more potent than what you would find in a food enzyme. And so when people look at enzymes, unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand the enzymatic equation. They don't understand the process, and they don't understand the variance. And a great cultured enzyme, and we have proved that. So Masszymes, we only produce cultured enzymes that are grown specifically. And we believe, caveat here, we're not making a claim, but when you use these in therapeutic levels or therapeutic doses, they are able to produce effects in the body that you can't produce from regular enzymes. And we have thousands of people and anecdotal evidence where, that has said that is absolutely what they experience. And I can't tell you how many people try enzymes and then they try ours and they go, wow, this is a wholly different. And that's because they're not the same class. It's a food enzyme versus a cultured enzyme. And so with a cultured enzyme, you can take those on an empty stomach and get a systemic enzyme response. And what that means is, like, I had a friend who had a scar on her shoulder that was about half inch thick and 3 inches long. She had gotten a spider bite and it was like a necrosis thing. And she had that for years, and it, caused her so she couldn't continue her career in the circus where she did silks and things like that. And as an experiment, I was giving her 5 masszymes twice a day on an empty stomach. And every time she took it, within 15 minutes, that scar would itch. And over the course of 9 months, the scar became completely flat to the skin and lost all the red discoloration and actually went to the color of skin so much her 3-year-old daughter she was holding her 3-year-old daughter, and the 3-year-old daughter grabbed her shoulder one day and says, "Mom, what happened to your scar? It's
Sorry,
gone."
it's on mute. That is insane. I love the systemic enzymes. I know for me it's fascinating because I always have this it's like a tense spot in my shoulder, and whenever I take high dose enzymes in the fasted state, I find that, like, that spot, or like areas where I think there is some sort of, scar tissue or buildup, I feel it, like it flares up, and I feel like it's actually going to work in that area. Um, Again, that's N of 1, but I mean, it's very, very real and present to me. Question about the cultured enzymes. I know you said it's proprietary and secret, but it has been posited. Well, first of all, are those cultured from like fungi or bacteria?
So different plants will produce different sets of enzymes.
So,
So it's plants that are fermenting, and then you extract the enzymes.
okay, so it's from,
I mean, it's a combination of, I mean, again, each enzyme, there's a way to culture that particular enzyme. That's kind of the secret sauce, but that should give you the gist.
okay, the reason I'm asking is I've seen people debating whether or not people, especially who have immune responses to, certain bacteria or different yeast or fungi, that they might have negative immune reactions to enzymes because of the culturing. So I wasn't sure if that was a factor there.
There is an outside potential that that's possible if you're doing, say, something like an aspergillus or something like that, which is a fungal based enzyme. And some people who have suffered from fungal type conditions are concerned about it. But I find in most cases, it's not an issue. I would say 99 times out of 100, it isn't. But there is that 1% case where it is. And of course, that's easily monitored. I don't underestimate the psychosomatic effect of someone who's developed an aversion to fungus to take something and get an aversion. So, like, kind of the negative placebo effect.
So true.
Right. So I always, anytime that you get any diagnosis about any kind of condition, I would always say caveat emptor, buyer beware of that diagnosis, because any of us are subject to a limited paradigm. And that is, we only know what we know, and there's actually more that we don't know than what there is. And I think biohackers are good in the standpoint they're not as easy to accept the limitations that have been brought down to them by, an external authority, no matter how science they are, because it doesn't matter how smart you are, you only know what you learned. And I think the whole aspect of biohacking is to break out of the limitation or the limiting paradigms that we are subjected to in our modern world, and to go beyond and to experiment and to take a little bit of what I would say, responsible risks in a pursuit of optimization. And that doesn't mean that every experiment is going to go right, but by that spirit that's all that's ever moved the human species forward, is to be able to take a calculated risk with various things. And the reality is, the risk of having some kind of issue with an enzyme is almost zero.
Yeah, ever since I've been recently studying very intensely, like the placebo effect and like the different, like the left right brain studies, and I've just realized we know nothing, and the implications of our mind is insane. Ever since I read, especially a study where they made it so that people, So only part of their brain could see certain objects and only part of their brain could see the other objects. And basically, long story short, the language part of their brain that had no idea the about anything that the person had experienced because of how they set up the experiment, the left brain would just come up with an entire story and make up an entire memory to explain events. And so the person would like literally think all these things had happened that never even happened because the brain just needed a reason. And I was like, okay, so I got to stop trying to figure out anything because it could just be all in my head. But I do have one question though, because I go high dose with enzymes. I'm a huge fan of enzymes. I take a lot fasted. I also take a lot with eating and digestion. But something I've been dying to ask you guys is, do you think there is the potential of taking too many enzymes with your food? Yes, you would super digest the food and it can like completely get rid of bloating and things like that. But would that arguably be, in a way, making the food almost more, quote, processed because you're breaking it down so much that it would be like akin to, for example, eating an apple versus apple juice? Like if you took so many enzymes with your meal, that would make it more, refined in a way.
It's not really that fast. The amylase is pretty fast, like the carbs, but proteins and fats take a longer time to break down. So I think what you're really asking is it going to just completely dissolve it in the stomach? And the proteins and the fats take a while. They're kind of working through the different phases of the digestive tract. That's why we have a variety of different proteolytic enzymes that get activated at different pH levels, so that as the pH is changing from the stomach to the small intestine to the large intestine, they're continuing to do their work. But it's not like just complete dissolving. I will say, in my experience and our clients' experience, the way to really optimize digestion is not necessarily to take more enzymes. Like I think for most meals, like 5 masszymes will digest just about anything on the enzymatic front. But it's to add HCl, let's say 2 caps of HCl, and then 1 or 2 caps of P3OM, which is our proteolytic probiotic. There's definitely synergy, especially with the HCl and the enzymes, because those are two different pathways. And like for example, heartburn is caused by not having enough acid, and then the gas builds up, pushes the valve open, and then the liquid comes up and you feel that burn. So and again, I like food, and I do a big 6,000 7,000 calorie day every Sunday. And it's a great opportunity to test things because there's a lot of food, and again, adding the HCl made a big difference. The other thing too is to optimize the enzymes for the food that you're eating. So we do have another product called Gluten Guardian, and I just went to Europe, London and Sarajevo. I was eating a lot of bread, never felt a second of bloating, thanks to Gluten Guardian. So that's a great tool in the toolbox. And then we have Capex, which is more designed for people on keto that are eating a lot of fat and eating a lot of protein. So, I think the answer is really pick the right enzymes for your diet or your meal, and then add HCl. And if you want to take it to the next level, then add P3OM. That's the combo that you just feel awesome. No bloating, no gas, and I think you really maximize the nutrient breakdown and absorption.
I agree. The protein and fat. I guess my concern was more with the carbs and the fiber. But so that sounds great.
Well, I will address that with masszymes. There's 17 different enzymes. There's a big proteolytic component, but there's 17 different enzymes. It's enzymes for the masses. It's probably the most sophisticated enzymatic uh, product on the market today to handle the widest range of variances. And the other products that we've cultivated are basically the branches out of that digestive thing. If you're eating a lot of, like you said, things that have gluten, you use Gluten Guardian. If you're on a more ketogenic diet, uh, I actually use Capex a lot just for the energy components. I take 4 every morning when I get up, and I absolutely love it. It's better than a cup of coffee because you don't get the nervous system responses. And those are different enzymatic, uh, you know, focuses for specific diets where you can get a little bit more tweak, because obviously we add a lot more lipase, which breaks down fats for for the ketogenic diet on the Capex product, and with Gluten Guardian, that's dealing specifically with gluten itself.
Okay, and I know we are coming on time, but so for listeners who want to get these supplements to optimize their digestion, what is a practical implementation of the order of these supplements? So if they're going to have their meal, what would they take at what point?
Okay, so the standard, and by the way, if you contact our company, we have a bunch of different, options for you based on your diet. Our staff is really well conditioned to answer those questions, and any question they can't answer gets directed directly to me. So you can be sure that you're getting solid information in regards to that. Typically, what we found is for people to get the maximum benefit, I do suggest that they commit to 90 days on what I would say a higher dosage. And we have just noticed with, we've had over 50,000 clients that the people who get the best results do that. And largely in part, the first 30 days, they start to notice a significant difference. First couple of weeks, they oftentimes notice a difference, but the first month they're like, okay, that's great. Second month, they start sleeping less. Third month, they're like, okay, I've definitely, this is unbelievably good. That's typically the practice that people go through. And of course, the more distressed they are, the earlier the benefits they feel. Usually the benefits they feel is less bloating and a lot better experience when they go to the bathroom. That's the first sign usually. But when you're taking enzymes, we suggest, I always use the balance of three. So 3 enzymes for a regular meal, 5 for a big one. If you're having an apple or something, 1 sufficient. 1 to 2 HCLs. If you do have a predisposition for heartburn or acid reflux or those things, you'll probably do better on 2 HCLs and 1 or 2 probiotics. I do like to take the probiotics to enzymes in a 2-to-1 ratio, or 2.5 to 1 if you're on the higher side of the enzymes. Do that for 90 days. And if you can, take 5 enzymes on an empty stomach and then add the P3OM at night, say add an extra 5 capsules of that before you go to bed so it can work all night long. Do that for 90 days. And if you want to do the high dosage at 5 before every meal, I think that's the winner of when it comes to enzymes. And then after 90 days, you can kind of titrate down to the level that's optimal for your diet. Because obviously a person that's maybe on intermittent fasting might not need as much, or if you're on time restricted eating, you could probably get away with less. I do believe the benefits of those things are due to the fact that they're preserving the enzymatic potential of the body. You're not manufacturing digestive enzymes. You're actually going for you're actually able to use your enzymatic production capacity to work on metabolic processes or heal the body. And so, and anytime that you add more and more of those enzymes, you're just adding more workers to commit more chemical processes. And if you look at the Gonzalez protocols that he was doing, people were doing like supraphysiological dosages of enzymes, anywhere, up to 500 a day, but they were in situations where they're dealing with cancer and things like that. We're not suggesting that you can do that. Got to be careful about those things. But I've not noticed any negative effect by going up to 1,000 enzymes a day, which I have done and experiment with, and I felt fantastic and didn't break the GI barrier like you would if you were taking any other product. So again, but not everybody can do that. I'm not recommending it, but usually 25 a day, 25 to 35 enzymes a day, 2 HCLs after every meal, and with 2 probiotics after every meal, and then empty stomach, 5 and 2 enzymes to P3OM. Do that for 90 days and then titrate down, and you'll see and feel the benefits. And it's an extraordinary place to live.
One more protocol too for people that are trying to gain a lot of weight, doing bodybuilding or just trying to gain mass. We've had a lot of clients use more to 50 to 100 a day range, which I know sounds a little wild. Bodybuilders are the most extreme. They were really the first biohackers, and they're all into extreme dosages. But what happens is your ability to eat less protein, get more aminos out of it, and not have the bloating and the issues that come from eating a lot of food are all mitigated, which is awesome.
Yeah, I think as anybody that's in one of the strength related sports or things that require a lot of physical effort and high training, like football and things like that, they tend to do better on the higher dosages. And of course, Matt, you have some research in regards to recovery components in martial artists, maybe you want to share with the effects of proteolytic enzymes on recovery, because your capacity to recover as an athlete is the determining factor of how much volume you can do. And the more volume and the more intensity that you can do as an athlete, the faster you get to a higher level. And that's, of course, limited by your abilities to recover. So you want to share that information, Matt?
Yeah, so they did a couple of studies with karate athletes and boxers, and they found that taking high dosage proteolytic enzymes on an empty stomach cut the recovery time of contusions, black eyes, all kinds of injuries by anywhere from like 40 to 60, 70%. So cut it in half basically, which is, again, if you're pushing yourself and you're dealing with injuries, is a great tool in the toolbox.
Awesome. Awesome. And we do super grateful for this. So if listeners are interested in getting some of these products and taking charge of their digestion and biohacking all the things with these supplements, they can go to masszymes.com/MelanieAvalon. And if you enter the coupon code Melanie10, you will receive 10% discount off of your order. So super grateful for that. Thank you guys. Listeners, I definitely encourage you to take advantage of that offer because these supplements are absolutely amazing. I love the enzymes. I love your P3OM. Is it back in stock, by the way? Fingers crossed.
The truck is landing at the warehouse today, so it should be able to come out by the time the podcast drops. So we'll have that back in stock. We've been selling so much of it lately; it's crazy to keep up with the demand.
Yeah, I feel like that's a sign of a good supplement, sign of a good thing when people want it.
Yeah, repeat purchases are kind of off the rails. It's awesome to see that.
Yeah, I saw that it was gone. I was like, oh no, what am I gonna do? So for listeners, all of this information will be in the show notes. And again, the show notes will be at melanieavalon.com/BiOptimizers. So thank you, Matt and Wade. This was absolutely fantastic. I wasn't sure like where the conversation was really going to go when we started, but I think we got into some really, really awesome, amazing topics. And there's just so much we could talk about. But this is great.
We just scratched the edge of the itch. So we'll have to come back and do some more.
Yeah, I really want to give a shout out to you, Melanie, for producing such a great show and making such a difference in the world. It's a real honor to be here, and we're really appreciative that you bring us on to share this stuff because it is something that can really make a positive impact in people's lives. And with so many people suffering, that's our goal. We're on a mission to end physical suffering and to activate what we call biologically optimized health or awesome health. And your message and your system is, I think, a big advocate. So thanks for having us on here.
Well, thank you. And actually, I'm so glad you said that. Well, first of all, thank you from the bottom of my heart. That really makes me feel so good. So thank you. I almost broke my streak. So the last question that I ask every single guest on this podcast, and I forgot. So glad that you said that. Just because I realized how important mindset is and everything when it comes to our health and our wellness. So what is something that you're grateful for?
I'm grateful for my spiritual practice. I think that finding a spiritual practice in your life gives context to some of the things that are very hard to deal with in life and the human condition. I always say that nobody gets out alive. It's pretty tough. So the bottom line, it gives you a greater context to address issues and to see yourself as part of not just your own individual isolated self, but part of a greater sense of humanity and what it means to be a responsible citizen and continuing on the trend that has existed, hundreds, if not millions of years before us, and hopefully will continue on in the future the same.
Well, Wade, I mean, that's always my number one thing as well is spiritual awareness, spiritual guide, spiritual growth, spiritual practice. But so since Wade used that one, I'll go to the next one, which I think is just the experience, the vitality that you experience when you do optimize your body and biohack. Wade and I were kind of relishing about that feeling, 16, 17 years ago when we started using enzymes at a high dose. And you just feel awesome, right? I mean, Wade and I are both in our 40s, and I feel better today than I did certainly in my early 30s, even in potentially late 20s. So that's exciting to me. Again, I think we're redefining what it's like to be a human being, and that really excites me. Whether it's supplements, biohacking, all the stuff we talked about, just having these tools and being able to feel great, 99% of the time is pretty darn awesome. So I'd say that's my second choice.
Well, thank you. I love hearing that, especially feel like we went into some dark places with discussing the potential future of things. So that was a wonderful note to end on, and I could not agree more. And I am so thankful for you guys, thankful for your company, and hopefully we can bring you back in the future for another episode.
Thank you very much.
Love it. Thanks, Melanie. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to the Melanie Avalon Biohacking Podcast. For more information, you can check out my book, What When Wine? Lose weight and feel great with paleo-style meals, intermittent fasting, and wine, as well as my blog, melanieavalon.com. Feel free to contact me at podcast@melanieavalon.com. And always remember, you got this.